Elevate TV, advancing kingdom lifestyle.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Gigi Report. My name is Godfrey Gishoke, and here we are again. Today is going to be very, very exciting. We are going to be talking about science, sexuality, and women empowerment. And we're going to give it a biblical perspective. And this is very, very exciting. I'm very, very happy to have this particular episode and this show. I have a special guest on the set, my friend, Dr. Tamari Esho. How are you? How are you, ma'am? And madam and daktari. Karibu.
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a very, very interesting conversation. So I want to give you a kind of a primer of our discussion today. So within the cultural fabric and religious practices of every known human community are hidden customs and norms and practices related to sex and sexuality. Now, while modern scientific advances have addressed sexual and reproductive health issues, challenges remain in addressing what we call retrogressive cultural practices, such as female genital mutilation or cutting, FGM/C, child early and forced marriage, they call it CEFM, and sexual and gender-based violence. And I think the most popular in our conversation is SGBV, sexual and gender-based violence. But today we are taking this conversation very, very deep indeed. We're going to talk about things that I know even in Christian circles you never hear this kind of conversation. But as always, I tell you, the Gigi Report is big, bold conversations, honest conversation on a broad range of subjects, as usual, cultural, socio-cultural, economic, philosophical, theological. Today, we're going to have a very, very serious conversation. So my guest is Dr. Tamari Esho, a public health and sexual medicine expert with a major focus on sexual and gender-based violence. Those are some of our focus areas. Dr. Esho earned a doctorate in biomedical science from KU Leuven, Belgium. That is, I think it's a Catholic university in Belgium, a very, very old university. And she supports the END FGM/C Center of Excellence with AMREF. And she is a researcher and capacity building for health care professionals. That's what she actually does most of the time. And of course, among other things, she's a member of several local and international professional organizations: Africa Society for Sexual Medicine, European Society for Sexual Medicine, and the Clinical Officers Council of the Ministry of Health here in Kenya. So it's a big CV, but we're going to be asking her to expound a little bit on that. And so this is going to be a very, very, very honest conversation. So welcome to the show once again, and happy to have you here.
Thank you, Pastor G.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's start from the beginning, as I always like asking my guests to tell us about their early years growing up, and then what inspired you to pursue biomedical science, which is obviously a very, the very depth of what science is all about. So let's start from there.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So I was born in Nairobi, Pumwani Maternity.
Oh.
And then I was raised, a lot of my years I was in Nakuru. So I went to school in Nakuru, finished the KCSE, and then I joined the Kenya Medical Training College to do clinical medicine and surgery.
Okay.
My initial interest was actually in fashion and design, art and design. But because of my very conservative upbringing, my parents did not want me to leave Nakuru, to leave home. So they had to find a solution for me. So the best solution for them at the time was get into KMTC and study clinical medicine.
Okay.
And this is because of the conservative upbringing, I was not really expected to advance my studies into university, do science. It was like I needed to do practical things that will actually contribute to society on a low level.
Right.
So it's interesting how my life turned out. That after doing clinical medicine and surgery, I was employed by the Ministry of Health and worked at the Provincial General Hospital in Nakuru for about a year and a half before I got an opportunity to go to Belgium. So while in Belgium, I had an opportunity to study. And so in the Faculty of Medicine, the only course that was being offered during that year in English was a Master of Science in Human Sexuality Studies.
Okay.
So I purely went to do sexual medicine by default.
Okay.
Now looking back, I see how God orchestrated my steps and guided me. Because like I'm telling you, I wasn't, in my mind, I didn't think I was going to do clinical medicine and surgery. I thought I would go into art and design, which was my passion and which I also majored in high school. But I also did sciences in high school. So also that gave me an advantage.
Okay.
Yeah, so I started my master's program in Belgium at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. And then I emerged the top because of my background in clinical medicine.
Okay.
Top of the class, so I got an opportunity for a PhD. So I get a scholarship and I start doing my PhD. And of course, it was majoring in sexual medicine, but under the umbrella of biomedical sciences, which was the faculty that hosted the studies. So, and that's how I ended up with a PhD in biomedical sciences.
Yes.
And returning in Kenya to really serve the nation.
I like the idea that you had this dream. You had your own dream, fashion design and all that. Perhaps you wanted to come to the city, the big city, and model around. Amazing. I mean, it's the way God orchestrates stuff. So do you still have a little bit of fashion on the side? Do you do that when you're not teaching biomedical science?
I do. When the Bible says everything works for good, everything has actually worked for good in my life.
Right.
And I really thank God for directing my steps even in ways I never knew and I never saw even how I was going to apply some of the training that I got until, of course, God revealing what exactly He wants me to do so that I get to understand my purpose and how it fits with God's overall purpose for mankind.
Absolutely. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your work at AMREF and in particular the program where you're the director, EdFGM/C program, Center of Excellence, where you work. So you can tell us a little bit about that. And yes.
Yeah. So I've always had a passion to work with women and girls in terms of supporting them to maintain their dignity for their physical health and sexual and reproductive health and their general well-being.
Yes.
And so I have tended to do work that is really leading me to promoting the health of women and girls in community. And of course, when you're working with women and girls, also you promote the health of the community in general. So at the Center of Excellence to End FGM in AMREF, we work around accelerating the abandonment of harmful practices. And this is female genital mutilation, and also child early and forced marriage, and also gender-based violence.
Okay.
So we run programs with the communities to support families to protect girls from harmful practices, to support families to understand and be aware about what the impacts of harmful practices are on women and girls. And to support women and girls to empower them to really, be able to exercise their power and agency, and to be empowered to have good livelihoods. Because with education, then they're able to improve their socioeconomic status, and then they're able to actually contribute to society as, members of society.
Please share the link if you're watching us on Elevate TV YouTube channel, that is Elevate TV Kenya, or Elevate TV Facebook channel. Please remember to share that, the link, so that people can follow this conversation. And you can also share with your friends. So when you work with communities, what specifically, of course you do the training, the awareness and stuff like that. So you can probably maybe mention some of the projects you're working on, so that then we can touch it to the ground. Maybe even big ones, or even supporting other projects that work with women and girls.
Yes. So maybe I'll begin by describing the harmful practices that we actually are working around abandonment.
Yes.
So female genital mutilation is a traditional practice amongst the communities that practice it, that involves the cutting of the female external genitalia for non-medical reasons. Yeah, so there are different types of FGM. Type 1 is what is known as the least severe type of FGM, that is also called clitoridectomy. So clitoridectomy involves the cutting of the female clitoris and parts of the prepuce. And this is practiced amongst Kenyan communities. It is practiced amongst the Kisii. And then we have type 2 FGM. This involves the cutting of the clitoris, the prepuce that covers the clitoris, and also parts of the labia minora. And this is the most common type of FGM that is actually practiced with many communities, the Kalenjin, the Kikuyu, the Taita, many communities in Kenya practice type 2 FGM. Okay. And then we have type 3 FGM that is called infibulation. Type 3 FGM is the most severe type of FGM. And this is where there's the cutting of those organs that I have already mentioned, together with the stitching to make a small vaginal opening for the girl. So this is about the cutting of the labia minora or the labia majora, and the repositioning them so that they heal when it is closed. So the Somalis would do that, and also the communities of the West Pokot. So sometimes the girl's legs will be tied so that the healing of the repositioning of the two labias can come together and heal as to reduce the vaginal opening. Or sometimes they can use stitches, or they can use even thorns, other very crude kind of things, to ensure that the vaginal opening is narrowed. So this is the most severe type, and it is also associated with a lot of health complications. Okay. So all types of FGM have complications from the immediate complications, which are from the day one that the girl is cut up to about 10 days. You have immediate complications, which will involve bleeding, will involve infections, maybe non-healing of the wound. And then you have the long-term complications that now follow the woman for the rest of her life. And this will involve things like obstetric complications, where there is obstructed labor when the mother is about to deliver her child. You have urinary tract infections. You can imagine when a woman has a small vaginal opening, even the flow of menstrual fluids, the flow of urine is somehow affected. So these women suffer from a lot of frequent infections. And some of these long-term complications also could involve issues to do with infertility and even sexual and relational problems for the couples. So the long-term impacts are a lot. Because of this awareness of the complications, a lot of community members now are increasingly doing medicalization of FGM, where they get the healthcare provider to actually do the cutting, either at the health facility, so they will take the girl to the facility. These are not open facilities where everybody knows the doctors do this, or the nurses or clinical officers, so it's hidden. Or they can have this healthcare provider come to the home and support the cutting of the girl there. So providers will bring anesthesia so that the girl is not in too much pain. They will bring antibiotics so that the girl does not get an infection. And all this is medicalizing FGM, which is also against the law, because in Kenya we have the law against FGM.
Absolutely. I told you that we're going to have a very, very honest conversation here. And this is very, very important information. For those of you that are pastors that are working, church communities that are working in some of the communities we are talking about here, you know that there are real deep, complicated cultural entanglements, things that you need to deal with and confront with. And I like what you're talking about. Off the set, you actually have something to demonstrate what you mean by all those three levels. Perhaps you can demonstrate that. We don't want to scare anyone, but I think it is important that we can empower the church. Remember, there are a lot of church people, people in the church community that are watching this. And it's important for people to actually know what goes on, so that then when you pray and when you seek to go to these communities, maybe as a missionary, to take some ministry work out there, you know what you're dealing with, and you can be a little bit more bold. So you can show us some of the things that. Yes. Remember, this is Dr. Tamari. This is her live work. This is what she actually has specialized in, up to the top intellectual level PhD. So this is a work that she has put in all her life in. So let's talk about it.
Yes. So before I show the model, I would like to maybe bring about some statistics, because you're mentioning that it's important for people, even who are working in any kind of ministry, to understand the prevalence of FGM and how many women are actually impacted by this problem.
Yes, we can talk about the numbers.
Yes. So in Kenya, we have 21% prevalence of FGM,
okay.
But this is the general prevalence. So among specific ethnic communities, such as the Somali, the prevalence is 93%. It's almost universal.
Wow.
Amongst the Samburu, it's 86%. Amongst the Maasai, it's 76%. And then, of course, you have the Kalenjin, who are ranging around 40%, the Kikuyus around 20-30%. So this makes a huge percentage, or numbers of women. Actually, 4 million women and girls are living with FGM in Kenya. So that's a huge percentage of women that are living with this issue. So as much as I'm talking about the complications, there are other women who may not be living with very severe complications, and they feel that it is manageable. But when you alter God's creation, definitely you're expecting to have an impact. So I brought this model, which is a model of a female clitoris, the clitoral organ. And it is the only organ in the body that God made purely for sexual pleasure.
Okay.
In the females.
We are bold here. Yes.
So, and it is also analogous to the male penis. So we have the top, if you can see here, this is the glans of the clitoris, the same way you have the glans of the male penis.
Okay.
And then you have the shaft, which sort of goes back into the pelvic cavity. And then you have the arms, the two arms that go around the vaginal opening. And then you have the two bulbs also that go around the vaginal opening. So when the glans of the clitoris has been cut, it is really just the tip of the clitoris that has been cut, which has about 8,000 nerves that supply the tip of the clitoris. And the nerves that actually supply the male glans penis is 4,000 nerves. Wow. So you can imagine the level of sensitivity that has been removed when that is removed.
Okay.
However, the good thing is, at least some good news, is that the rest of the clitoris that is buried within the pelvic cavity is still there. So a lot of women, as much as some women suffer from sexual complications, they do not feel pleasure, they have a lot of sexual complications. When you realize that you still have quite a lot of the clitoral tissue still buried within the pelvic cavity, then it gives some hope that sexual pleasure is still possible, as much as the glans of the clitoris has been removed.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's still more we can talk about that whole thing, but I think I like the idea that you're giving hope. You're saying it is not all over. Even some of the people that have, unfortunately, because of the culture they are embedded in, have ended up in this scenario. There is, and you are an expert in that. You've done a lot of studies and published actually journal papers in this particular field. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of the data, some of the journals, and what you discovered out of those studies, some of those field studies.
Yeah, so one of my first studies on female genital mutilation amongst the Maasai, I investigated the psychosexual consequences of FGMC amongst the Maasai women.
Okay.
And so I implemented an ethnographic kind of approach, which was qualitative in nature, a qualitative methodology. So I interviewed women and girls, I interviewed men, and I also had focus group discussions.
Yes.
So it was interesting to get a perception of what the Maasai woman was thinking about the FGM. And one of the interesting things is that as much as the impact that came out in terms of their psychosexual impact was that they had a reduced sense of sexual desire and sexual arousal. But traditionally, that is what was expected. So it is not something that they felt was abnormal. It was something that they felt is what was expected because the traditions somehow are controlling female sexuality. So that is the expected outcome that they had.
Yes.
So they somehow found a way to live their lives with that in mind because they believe that they are full women, they're now able to get married, they're able to get children. So somehow there was the positive dimension of culture that they experienced despite the physical loss that they also experienced.
Okay.
And this also leads us to some of the interventions that we have. For instance, in AMREF, we've implemented for a number of years the Alternative Rites of Passage program,
All right.
which tries to maintain the positive aspects of culture, but eliminating the cut from happening to the girls.
Yes.
So we work with communities, we work with women and girls, we work with administrative leaders to have to develop modules and a program that is actually context specific to fit in with the meanings behind the rite of passage for the Maasai girl. And then that way we've been able to have very successful program over the last 10 years that we conducted an impact evaluation in 2019 that is also just published in 2021, where we saw that despite the other interventions that have been implemented, the specific area where we had alternative rites of passage program, there was an impact in terms of reducing the prevalence of female genital mutilation by 24%, reducing the child early and forced marriage by 7%, reducing teenage pregnancies by 6%, and even more interesting, increasing the number of years that these girls who underwent alternative rites of passage stayed in school by 2.5 years more as compared to the other girls that didn't go through the program.
Absolutely.
So we are happy with that finding because it tells us that something good is happening out of the intervention that we implemented.
Those of you that are watching and you're doing your master's programs, and you are having to do those field research and do the data analysis. Now you can see when you come to defend your thesis, what is going to be happening. If you happen to be studying under Dr. Tamari, she's going to be required that you are able to articulate your numbers in that way. So I think we are also helping, even in just bringing that kind of thing. The faithfulness to the process and being able to study these ideas and see the impact, so that then when you move in to apply certain interventions, then you know what to expect. Amazing. And I think that's very, very good news. I know before we end around that issue, there's something you've mentioned that I would like you to come to just very, very briefly. The idea that within the culture, there are some positive aspects, and I'm not really rooting for the maintenance of the general retrogressive culture, because we need to teach, to bring light and teach the word of God and help people lift their status and all that. What about the issue of identity and all that? How is that influenced by, when you do these kind of programs?
Yeah, so some of the positive aspects that come out of these cultures is that the women get a sense of belonging.
Yes.
So they feel that they can identify with the community where they live. There are aspects around marriageability. And that's why female genital mutilation goes hand in hand with child marriage. So when the girl is cut, then she is considered a full woman, at least amongst communities that practice FGM as a rite of passage, ready to be married. And that's where now the issue of child marriage comes in. So some of the positive dimensions are like that sense of belonging, a sense of acceptance, the issues around femininity and marriageability are things that came out of my study, that the Maasai woman experiences out of that. So if we're able to still support this woman to achieve that without undergoing the cut, then our job is done.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That our Christian viewers and people who are involved in the ministry to understand how powerful the gospel is. That yes, it addresses those very fundamental questions that some of these communities are wrestling with: identity, marriageability, value of the woman and the girl, and the gospel speaks to that. Wow, amazing. And do you also, introduce Bible study programs within those programs?
So not specifically under the umbrella where I work in AMREF, but of course in other programs that we support in different kinds of ministries, we do have some kind of discipleship programs.
Absolutely.
So like we work with girls who've have undergone like teenage pregnancies, they've dropped out of school. So we support them to reintegrate back into the school system. We disciple them, and it always serves, we always have greater impact when you integrate real needs and real priorities of communities, women and girls, into the ministry program.
Okay, good. We will return to that. So we're going to take a short break. We've already, been on this for a number of minutes. So we're going to take a short break. Then we'll come back to that conversation, how we can incorporate other, the ministry, the Bible study, pastoral work into this kind of, the science bit of it and the ministry bit of it. Okay, so don't go away. Just take a short break. Grab yourself a cup of coffee. We're coming back shortly. This is the GG Report. This is a bold conversation.
Welcome to the Festival of Hope. We are hosting this celebration and a moment to bring the gospel. It's a 5-day tent meeting, and we are looking forward for you coming, men, women, youth, children, leaders, everybody. And we are also hosting evangelist John T.L. Marshberg from the Johan Marshberg Ministries in Netherlands, in The Hague.
It's the most wonderful love story you have ever heard.
This is the time that the church needs and the people need hope from God.
God has prepared for us a wonderful festival that we may come and rejoice in his presence.
Wamama, wazee na hata waibaji wakuje tumshangilie Yesu.
And I'm asking all pastors and every person to come as we proclaim the gospel of power.
Young people who are there, young mothers, parents who are there, this is a meeting to bring healing to your life and to your family.
Great things are going to happen. You shouldn't miss.
We are saying welcome to Kasarani.
We look forward to see you. Don't miss out in the Festival of Hope in this Nairobi North.
All right, welcome back. This is the GG Report. We are having a very, very serious and deep conversation here. We are talking about science, sexuality, and women empowerment. From a biblical perspective, my guest here, Dr. Tamari Esho, is a scientist, biomedical scientist, and she has studied the area of sexuality, and she's an expert actually. And we are having a very, very interesting conversation. Before we went to the break, we were talking about the idea of empowering women and dealing with the challenge of FGM/C, and that's a very, very huge challenge. So Dr. Tamari, we were talking about the idea that you've seen a lot of transformation, especially in the areas where there has been intervention and introducing the idea of alternative rites of passage, and that has produced some very, very positive impact. And then we were talking about maybe perhaps how somebody can add in the idea of discipleship into that. And that's very, very good. So, but then now we know that the last 2 years, we've been battling another very, very big problem, which has also had an impact on, I think, some of these areas, the COVID-19. So maybe you could tell us, and I know you've done some study, I saw some research work that was published, I think, last year, in respect to sexuality and the relationship with COVID-19. So you can tell us about how the impact and how that has affected the programs.
Yes, so since the onset of the pandemic, we knew that something will happen that will be negatively impacting women and girls, and of course communities in general.
Yes.
So we conducted research that looked at the impact of COVID-19 on gender-based violence and on harmful practices. We also did another study that looked at the sexual relationships amongst couples during the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the important things that came out was that the lockdown measures, so the restricted movements, affected a lot of, for instance, the girls that would have otherwise have been at school, now they're at home. When they're at risk of undergoing the cut, there is nowhere to run to. The fact that there were school closures, the girls would stay at home, and the parents would begin to figure out, so what do I do with this girl? Maybe she should just get married. Getting married in some of those communities means undergoing FGM. So there was increased risks for girls to undergo FGM and also to undergo child early and forced marriage. We know also our media captured a lot of stories around gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, because also partners or couples stayed at home together for long durations and it stopped becoming an exciting thing.
Right.
And there was a lot of mental stress also associated with the uncertainties of the pandemic. There were losses of livelihoods with people losing jobs, people working from home, and hence the socio-economic aspects of families was affected. A lot of these communities are marginalized communities who rely on cattle, on livestock, and there was no markets anymore to sell livestock. So the families had to figure out different survival kind of mechanisms.
Okay.
And when we undergo pandemics, when we have humanitarian crises or different kinds of disasters, it is the women and girls that carry the largest burden.
Okay.
Yeah. So so we saw an increasing gender inequalities. So the women and girls suffered a lot more than the men did. Of course, also because women's jobs, working in the markets, working in hospitality industries, all that was closed down.
Yeah.
So it impacted the women very negatively.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's really a conversation we need to have, because there are these communities that live in the margins, literally, margins of Kenya. So to the extent one time, I understand people who live, for example, in the northern eastern part of Kenya, they would say something like habari za huko Kenya mtokako. It's like they consider Kenya is Nairobi and where they live is not Kenya. So there is that reality of being in the margins, marginalized. Do you think that both government and non-government actors are doing enough to address the problems that are faced by these communities?
Yeah, so having been faced by the issue or the problem of the pandemic, we needed to really go back to the drawing board and figure out how do we reach this marginalized woman and girl with services, sexual reproductive health services, with information, and with different kinds of, protective mechanisms or interventions. And one of the first things we did was that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the community health workers were really on the ground supporting communities in terms of providing the awareness about COVID-19, speaking about health promotion, washing your hands, sanitizing, wearing masks. And these are people who we figured we could utilize more in terms of giving them, enhancing their capacities to work with women and girls for prevention of harmful practices.
Okay.
These are also people who are linking the community to health facilities.
Okay.
So in case there is a woman who's suffering from particular problems, health problems, complications that need to be addressed, the community health worker will be able to refer the woman, because they are really at the intersection of the community and the health systems.
Okay.
And of course, when we are going through disasters and different kinds of crises, these also offer opportunities. So we were able to begin using technology much more to reach to these women and girls, to conduct our trainings and capacity building to the community health workers. We use technological platforms to reach, these community workers in the ground.
Okay.
So opportunities also arise out of crisis, and it is just about how do we take advantage and utilize or exploit these opportunities to support the women and girls.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think talking about technology and the opportunities that opened up, I think we all saw how, for example, the idea of using Zoom and the idea of online education. It became very, very possible actually to do some of these things online, and I guess that really did empower and create avenues. New way of disseminating information and reaching to those communities. So what are the barriers, and how can some of the church communities get involved in addressing those issues? Yes.
Yes, so a lot of the barriers that are making women and girls to be left behind include things like low levels of education.
All right.
A lot of these women in marginalized communities, they probably did not have a chance to go to school or to be well educated, maybe because they are also pastoralists or nomadic communities. We also have barriers around economic empowerment. So when the woman is not able to help herself in terms of just her day-to-day life, then they end up being dependent on, for instance, maybe men or other people that are going to abuse them.
Yes.
For food, for sanitary towels, for the girls that became pregnant during the COVID-19 pandemic. A study showed that these adolescent girls actually fell pregnant because they had to look for food or for sanitary towels.
Okay.
So economic empowerment is important, because when you empower the mother, she will be able to support her children. And of course, the girl will have an opportunity to go through school and be educated and be able to stand on her own 2 feet. So we have these kinds of barriers. On the higher level, we have the policy kind of issues that you're mentioning. So our government has been very instrumental in terms of enacting laws to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, from harmful practices, and even child marriage. We have laws and policies.
Yeah, and maybe you can clarify on that law. Sorry that I'm interrupting. That there is actually an act of Parliament. It's illegal to actually carry out those activities. Yes, I think you need to expound on that.
Yes, so we have the Prohibition of FGM Act that was enacted in 2011.
Okay.
And of course, this was also covered in the Children's Act of 2001. And then we also have other acts around sexual violence, which promote or protect women from these harmful practices and gender-based violence.
Okay.
The barrier around that is how much of that is actually implemented.
Okay.
So you will meet gender officers, or you will meet people at the community, working at the community level, even in the NGOs, who may not even understand that these policies and laws exist. Or so there's a lack of awareness amongst community members about the laws. And then there's also the rebellion in terms of, we also have our cultural rights.
Yeah. So who are you guys out there to be creating laws and criminalizing
our cultural practice?
Our cultures?
Yes.
These are good cultures. We are wonderful. We are okay the way we are. We are happy. The community is happy. Everybody's happy. These girls, look at them. They are happy here, and we are looking after them. So so there is that other flip side of the issue. All
exactly,
right?
where people do not understand how laws work, and people demonstrate or protest against. Maybe a girl has been cut, the parents are arrested.
Right.
And then the girls and the other siblings who are very tiny and many are left alone in the house. So there's this conflict about how do we implement or enforce some of those laws. So there's a bit of challenge there.
Okay.
But this tells us that we need to work with communities to create more awareness, to develop homegrown solutions from the communities themselves in terms of them understanding why this is a problem and why it needs to end.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love the idea of homegrown solutions because I think that's where the opportunity for the church is. When we talk about the influence of Christian church, the Christian church in this nation, there isn't a community or a place, a region in this country where you can't find a church. Do you think actually a pastor maybe perhaps could also be, can double as a social worker and maybe perhaps do a better job?
Definitely, because he's in touch with the community, he's in the grassroots.
Yes.
So we actually identify those kinds of people. We work a lot with religious and cultural leaders also in our programs.
Yes.
Because they're really on the ground and they're respected.
Okay.
So it is important, like you're saying, to have a church leader or a religious leader who understands what's going on within the community, what are the problems, what are the priority, what areas that they can work in, what are the needs of these people, and integrate these things within ministry, within the discipleship programs. Another thing is when you're looking for homegrown solutions, you have to build capacities of, say church members, community members, to be able to understand. Maybe they can have programs of adult education to support them to understand some of these things that are going on that might be beyond their reach because they didn't have any kind of formal education.
Absolutely.
Maybe support the women and girls within every community, even in areas like I was telling you before, you get into an area and you find it is so dry. What do people eat here? Where do they get water from? And one time we went to Tharakanithi and there was that kind of a situation. And then we appear into this very deep village, so far away, and we find a women group knitting or weaving their baskets by hand. Mm-hmm. And they have a lot of the baskets there, never knowing where they're going to sell them or what they're going to do with them. It's almost like just an act of faith.
Right.
And then we came with this group of an American professor who would help them to link them with a market in the US.
Right.
So we were all buying the baskets, and there's a story always behind the woman that made the basket. And this is very, encouraging in terms of who you are supporting.
Absolutely.
And these are the kinds of solutions that can be homegrown. In every community amongst the Maasai, the Samburu, they do a lot of beadwork.
Okay.
So how can we use whatever tools and resources that are available in those communities to support the women to build their economic empowerment and to also teach them on life skills?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Those of you that are following this conversation, you are in ministry or you're part of a church organization that works with some of these communities that are in the margins. I like calling them communities in the margin. You know there is a way you can help and you can become part of the solution. And not only do you need to do pastoral work, but you can go beyond pastoral work and engage communities, maybe connecting them, creating the links with markets for their product, and helping empower them economically and also in terms of knowledge, education. Very, very important that churches are involved in educating the community, not only just teaching them God's word, but also perhaps also adult education for some of those women that were not able to go through normal schooling. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And Dr. Tamari, before we end this conversation, what is keeping the African woman behind? And that question needs to be answered because I know there are answers that are being provided that are probably not quite it. And I need to hear from you. You stayed in Europe, you studied in Europe, so you're very familiar. What's keeping the African woman behind?
Yeah, so really I think the system requires, we need an enabling environment that supports the women to access opportunities and access services, access education, and these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Because when there is lack of education, you find that there is poverty, the cycle of poverty continues. Mm-hmm. So we need to provide opportunities for women so that they stop remaining behind and they're able to do something for themselves. I normally say this is a walk of faith. So you have to keep walking.
Right.
You cannot just sit and wait on God to to do, his work on you. You also have to be available to respond to the call when he does it.
Okay.
So it is a walk of faith. You keep doing what you need to be doing until at a time when it will become clearer what your purpose is and and how it aligns with God's purpose for your life. And then everything begins to be very easy. A lot of times we speak about the passion that you have. As you're a young girl in school, you never really understand what you're going to do with yourself. I didn't know that how I was going to, to impact the world in a way that God has enabled me to do so. And I didn't know all the steps that I had taken earlier, even when I did so blindly, that it was going to work together to allow me to be in the opportunity, to get the opportunity that I now have to impact the lives of women and girls. So I would really just like to encourage young girls who are in universities, young girls who are in schools, to really focus on what they need to focus on at the time that they need to. Because the word tells us that time and chance is available to all of us. Mm-hmm. So in God's divine time, what you need to do at this time, I usually tell my children, I've got two kids,
yes.
One who's 20 years old and another one is 15 years, to focus on what they need to be doing at this time, because that's what God wants them to do.
Okay.
To be in school, to study hard, to focus on the right things, to avoid distractions that the enemy brings to them, in terms of drug use and drug abuse, in terms of sexual immorality, because these are things that are going to derail the young people from achieving their purpose in the future.
Absolutely.
So really just the focus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. So I think you're hearing this very clearly. Those of you young men and women, I think I will add the men into this conversation. You need to find your place, focus on what you're doing right now. Believe God, it's a walk of faith. And you never know even some of the things that you're doing. Later on, when you look back, you will see that everything that you did counted for the good and for your future. So stay focused, and I love that. That's a very powerful message for our. Now I'll give you just 20 seconds to speak to the young girls and give them a warning. There is always an admonition and a warning how to manage their sexuality. Just in 20 seconds.
Yeah. So
looking at that camera.
Yeah, so sexuality is an aspect that is, that involves all of us as human beings. And as we are growing as humans, you get to adolescent and your hormones begin to rage and your body begins to change and you begin to see different things. Attraction to the opposite sex also begins to come in at this time. But understanding your sexuality is important, because then you don't have to act out on the things that you're feeling that are going on in your body. So you have to, you have to. I usually do a lot of mentorship with girls so that they're able to, to really live through the difficult periods of the adolescent period, so that they're able to actually actualize their sexuality later on in life at the opportune time with responsibility. So you need to be able to exercise your sexuality at a time when you're able to be responsible for the outcomes of that, that sexual behavior.
Absolutely.
Yes, and this would be things like sexually transmitted diseases. It would be a pregnancy. So it's important to buy time, not to be in a hurry. You focus on the education that you need to focus on at the time until when the right time comes for you to exercise your sexuality.
Absolutely. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very, very important conversation. Dr. Tamari, our guest here, has spoken very, very well and given us a lot of information. We got to bring this to a close. I have been your host, Godfrey Gishoke. This is the Gigi Report. Thank you so much for staying tuned in. We'll come back again, same time, same channel. Keep it Elevate TV, and God bless you. Have a great evening. God bless you. Bye-bye.